So listen to this. Back in 2018, mere hours after Mané had scored to clutch a 2-1 win, a video popped up online of him cleaning the toilets of his local mosque. Immediately, everyone on social media gathered either to praise his humility or point out how strange this was coming from a player who Lionel Messi himself would soon vote as the best on the planet. However, Mané's reaction to this whole thing maybe wasn't what everyone expected. He just shrugged it off, saying that I asked him not to post that video. He didn't want whatever this praise was supposed to be. To him, this was nothing special. It was all he knew. Growing up, his own father was a spiritual leader of their mosque, though this story isn't really about him, because as Mané told it himself, I was 7 years old, about to go play in the field when my cousin approached me and said, "Sadio, your father has passed away." I replied, "Oh, really?" thinking he was joking. I couldn't understand it. He had this sickness, but we'd bring him traditional medicine and it always calmed down. That time, it was not the case. There was no hospital in Bambali. There was no way to save his life. So, that day, Mané decided he would change not just his life, not just the life of his family, but the life of everyone in Bambali. And he saw only one way that could be done: football. But if the fact there was no place to play football in Bambali aside from that third field he was walking towards already made that almost impossible, then an even bigger problem arose. With his father's passing, his uncle not only took charge of the mosque, he was made responsible for Mané, and he saw football as nothing but a distraction. With each passing year, he forced Mané into working more and more hours in the mosque until one day he outright forbade him from playing. So, at 15, Mané went missing. As a childhood friend would explain, he fled Bambali. He fled in secret without informing anyone, walked a long, long way, and then took the bus to Dakar. You see, Dakar was like a football oasis in Senegal. While anywhere within 100 miles of his hometown, you'd be hard-pressed to find a patch of grass in which to practice. In Dakar, some academies even had partnerships with European clubs. So Mané traveled for days in order to get there, planning to simply play in the street hoping someone would notice his skills. But though eventually his childhood friend caved in, told his family his whereabouts, and after 2 months we went to Dakar and brought him home. 7 months later, he was already going back, this time with a plan. As he said it himself, "Then I took part in actual trials. There were 300 youngsters waiting in line, and when I stepped forward, they all left. I didn't look like a footballer. I was wearing pants instead of football shorts. My football boots were shredded, held together by wire. Even the scouts looked at me with this bizarre expression." However, they weren't laughing. That look, it was because they had just laid eyes on the greatest Senegalese player of all time. After 3 years at Académie Génération Foot, Mané's day finally arrived. Their partners, FC Metz, paid for their top academy graduates to fly out to France, and a month later, as most of them returned, Mané stayed. Such was his desperation to hold on to that opportunity that, according to the club's own physio, it took me 2.5 months to notice he had a hellish groin injury. He needed surgery and still would refuse to complain about it. Yet, even then, it took him only 4 months to make it to the first team, and though after 4 more, unluckily, he watched Metz get relegated to the 3rd tier for the first time in their history. Within 12 starts, he had made enough of a splash to get called up to the Olympics. As you may imagine, given that they were calling up a player who had barely even played professionally, Senegal were not supposed to stand a chance. But then, they went up against a British squad containing Ryan Giggs and Daniel Sturridge, and Mané slipped in the perfect ball to hold them to a draw, went up against Uruguay and managed to send Suarez and Cavani home with a defeat, meaning that once they were knocked out in the quarters, all the way out in Austria, Ralph Rangnick and Gerard Houllier agreed they had to do anything in their power to get this rough diamond out to RB Salzburg. It had been such an absurdly quick rise that when Metz received a bid that far outweighed all others on the table, in the words of Mané himself, the president told me, "Look kid, it's 4 million, I have no choice." And I cried like a kid. Metz had just started to feel like home, and I didn't want to leave again. Now, 3,000 miles away from Bambali, living in a one-bedroom flat with a beaten-up leather sofa and not much else, though he was warned that he may be aiming too high after he told the club's staff his target was to win the Ballon d'Or, eventually settling by saying that, "Okay, then I want to be African Player of the Year first." Well, on his 3rd match, he scored 2 and assisted another to clutch a 3-2 win against rival Sturm Graz. 4 matches after that, he got his first hat-trick, and the next month, his second one. So, a year later, as he finished the season with 29 goal contributions, won every 82 minutes. Even if they had fallen short of the league title, they started thinking twice before doubting him. By his second season, Mané was already scoring his fourth hat-trick to put him in the Austrian Cup final where he'd win his first trophy. Meanwhile, in the league, he had dragged every other team through the mud, putting Salzburg 18 points on top of the table, at one point hitting 23 goal contributions in 14 games. And though the time he put down 2 goals and assists to demolish Ajax in the Europa League could have been the game that changed it all, the reality is that the real turning point did not come thanks to any of his 41 goal contributions in official matches, but during a winter break friendly against Bayern Munich. That day, the Red Bull Arena sold out for the first time since the 2008 Euros, and half of it may as well been all the scouts that were there to watch, as 30 minutes in, Mané slipped the opener past Neuer before winning the penalty that led to the second 7 minutes later and setting up another for a shocking 3-0 demolition of the European champions. Rangnick called it legendary, a teammate claimed Mané taught Guardiola a lesson, and out in Dortmund, Klopp got on the phone dialing up anyone who could get him in touch with a player, but once they met, according to Mané, Klopp was taken back by his outfit, claiming his baseball cap made him look like a rapper, and after some pushback from the club, it passed on his signing. Though, alongside him or not, Mané would leave Salzburg, controversially going on strike, missing the most important game in the club's history and watching them lose their chance of a first UCL qualification in 20 years, putting everything on the line for a £12 million move to Southampton. Once in England, however, things got rough. As The Athletic wrote, one game it was an absolute world beater, and another it'd have you thinking, for goodness sake, what's going on? And in that first season, that inconsistency couldn't have been more obvious. After 7 goals in the first 36 league games, he showed up with 2 matches left to score the fastest hat-trick in Premier League history, smacking in 3 goals in 2 minutes and 56 seconds, breaking Robbie Fowler's record, only to show up for a friendly against none other than RB Salzburg at the beginning of the next season and get jeered by their fans who still hadn't forgiven him, forcing him to question all he had done. In his own words, that was a trigger. After that, I told myself I no longer had the right to make mistakes. But really, after going into the new season in full force, at one point hitting 8 goal contributions in 7 games, taking a man of the match against Chelsea and scoring within 39 seconds against Liverpool, he then went on a 16-match dry streak, culminating in a red card, and throughout the 8 days he had to wait for his following game, he could only think of one thing. With his next game coming precisely against Klopp, and only 7 more left until the end of the season, he either ended up being remembered as the guy who scored that fast hat-trick, or he showed Klopp precisely why he should not have passed on his signing. So when the day came, Mané scored twice to come back from 2 goals down to defeat Liverpool, and then hit 6 more goals before the end of the season, including a hat-trick against Guardiola's Man City to make that 22 goal contributions, dragging Southampton up to 6th place, above Liverpool and into the European competitions for the first time in 12 years, leaving Klopp no choice but to go back and put down £34 million for his signing, making him the most expensive African player of all time. And no matter how much pushback there was from the fans who insisted it'd be a guaranteed flop, soon Klopp would be calling the 2 years it took him to finally sign him the biggest mistake of his career. If there was any doubt that Mané had been planning for this day his whole life, on his debut he scored one of the goals of the season, secured a win against Arsenal, and just never stopped. It was goal after goal as Liverpool tried to find their footing in the early days of the Klopp era, so much that even after going injured and missing the final 8 league games of the season, it was already being named the club's player of the year, because they knew they would have never secured Champions League qualification without him. But man, that turned out to be much more important than they could imagine, because the next year Salah, Van Dijk and Robertson arrived, and though that forced the ever so unselfish Mané to move to the left flank, by the end of August he was being named the league's player of the month. By November he had led Senegal towards their first World Cup qualification since the time of Ali Hadji Diouf, his childhood idol, and that same month he scored against Sevilla, and from there on out scored against every single team he faced in the Champions League until the end of the season. 2 against Spartak to close out the group stage, a ridiculous hat-trick against Porto, another goal versus City, then one home and another way to beat Roma to the final. And though there, Mané's 10th goal in the competition wasn't enough to secure the trophy, in the same way that, over summer, his World Cup performances weren't enough to get Senegal into the knockouts, as they became the first ever nation to be eliminated over their yellow card record. There were more important things for Mané. Having now been under a multi-millionaire contract for over 2 seasons, after the tournament he went back to Bambali and spent over €1 million building a new school, a new house for his family, all infrastructure needed for internet access, even setting up a fund so that every family got roughly the equivalent of a Senegalese minimum wage every month, and above all, building a new hospital, so that no child will ever have to lose a relative, a father, the way he had. However, just because that was done, it didn't mean those defeats didn't hurt. Having already been beaten twice to the African Player of the Year award by Mohamed Salah, as his own national team manager theorized that it happened because Salah is selfish and Mané is selfless. That year, even with Salah taking all the penalties, Mané managed to show up with 4 goals in the final 2 games of the season just in time to match both Salah's and Aubameyang's goal tallies and take the Premier League's Golden Boot, all while, ironically, scoring one of the goals of the season against Bayern Munich as well as another against Porto, before showing up in a second UCL final in 2 years, winning a penalty 24 seconds in, and still handing Salah the chance to convert a goal that brought European glory back to Liverpool after 14 years. And yet, even as he repeatedly refused to truly snatch the spotlight off of Salah, even after he watched Mahrez lift the African Cup of Nations right in front of him as he lost another final, there, he'd been named the player of the tournament regardless. Then, by the time the new season started, he'd be getting applauded during a friendly against his former club Bull Salzburg, as the fans simply could no longer hold on to their resentment, seeing how great of a player and a man he had become. And at the end of the year, with a man of the match performance in the European Super Cup and an assist for the winner in the Club World Cup final, all while leading Liverpool on their greatest ever unbeaten run, Mané would be rising to 4th place at the Ballon d'Or, having the honor of being voted as the winner by Messi himself, and finally, being named African Player of the Year, all in the same month in which he was spotted helping the national team staff carry packs of water bottles into the locker rooms, while every other player ignored them, soon opening up during an interview by claiming that, "Why would I want to have 10 Ferraris, 20 watches with diamonds and 2 aeroplanes? I've been hungry, I worked the fields, I played barefoot. I'd much prefer to share with my people all that life has given me." And thankfully, life wasn't done giving back. Despite the fact that following his first Premier League title at the end of the season, Mané would come back looking substantially weaker, with rumors of long COVID affecting his game. In reality, the pandemic had also led to the suspension of the African Player of the Year award for 2 consecutive years, and with the chance to match Salah, who had 2 awards to his name, Mané's comeback was quick and ruthless. With Liverpool midway through their run for the quadruple, Mané and Salah both left for yet another African Cup of Nations, and as the two refused to buckle, carrying their respective countries on their backs, they ended up meeting in the final, watching the full 120 minutes fly by them, and with a penalty shootout deciding which of the 2 teammates would get to experience one of the greatest moments of their careers. Both waited for the chance to take the 5th and final penalty. However, before Salah had the chance, the boy who years before had arrived in Dakar barefoot now rifled in his shots and inundated its streets with a sea of people. Senegal were African champions for the first time in their history. And as people began arguing this had all been a matter of luck, just a month later Salah got the chance to prove that. But as Egypt and Senegal met again, this time in the World Cup playoffs, with both approaching their 31st birthdays and knowing this tournament would be their last chance at glory, once everything came down to penalties again, Salah stepped up for the first one and missed. Meanwhile, with Mané taking on the responsibility of taking the decisive penalty yet again, it didn't even seem to think twice. Now, there were no remaining doubts over which of the two was the man to call when everything is at stake. And though, for the remainder of the year, Mané would experience his own fair share of disappointment, scoring in both the quarters and the semis only to watch his team lose yet another Champions League final to Real, as well as losing out on a domestic treble by a solitary point, eventually even completing a transfer move out to Bayern, impressing with 15 goal contributions in 22 matches, only to then get sidelined for 102 days, missing out on the World Cup he had fought so hard to be in, and in the end, watching his country finally get out of the group stages without him. One way or another, he'd not only get his second African Player of the Year award matching Salah, but he'd rise up to second place in the Ballon d'Or, proving that maybe that kid from Bambali truly wasn't crazy to think that he could become the best on the planet.